I'm going to begin with some antidotes. Antidotes? Stories. How do you... I personally know each of the principals involved, but I will not obviously reveal their names. It was 1985, a conversation over drinks at dinner. The friend I was with was then a prominent leader of the American Lutheran Church, instrumental in the merger conversations and a member of the task force. He asked the pianist to play a certain song, and he warned me to stop talking when the song began. Tears came to his eyes. The song ended. He explained that when he was on pastoral internship, he had met and fallen in love with a divorced woman. And her status as divorced precluded any possibility of marriage if he wanted to become a pastor. It just would not have worked, he said, not back then. That was in the late 1940s. If you were to be a pastor in the American Lutheran Church or in any Lutheran church in America in the 1940s, 1950s, on into the early 1960s, you simply could not marry a previously divorced woman. 1978, Detroit, Michigan. The pastor is a graduate of what is now called Trinity Lutheran Theological Seminary. He was a student there in the 1960s, and his marriage was unraveling. His spouse left him briefly during that time. The best advice he received from the president of the seminary was, get a good bottle of wine and a motel room. Or maybe it was a good motel room and a bottle of wine. Work it out or drop out were his options. He and his spouse reconciled. He graduated, received a call, and while in his first parish the marriage collapsed irretrievably, he was compelled immediately to resign, as was customary. And in the time that he was off the ALC roster, he met and married another woman, and that marriage has happily endured. By the time I knew him, 1978, he had been back in parish ministry some few years, and he re-entered first as a part-time assistant and later as a full-time pastor. But that happened only after a thorough and somewhat rigorous examination by the ALC bishop and after formal readmission to the clergy roster. 1986, in South Carolina, an older second career seminarian, a woman, is supplying a parish, and she took the occasion of her sermon to speak of her call to public ministry and her summons to theological education and parish ministry involved, as it often does for second career folk, a vast unraveling of home and career and income. And in this lady's instance, as she revealed, her transition also entailed severe strain on her marriage. Her husband had no desire to uproot their family and move. This was solved, she related, when the last child graduated high school and she and her husband divorced. Her call to pastoral ministry, she believed, justified that sacrifice. One more story, also from Detroit, 1990. A pastor is being interviewed for call. He receives a nod and accepts, arrives at the congregation without his spouse, and announces, by the way, the wife won't be joining him. They are in the process of seeking a divorce. As a matter of fact, the process had been underway while he was interviewing with the congregation, but he withheld that information from the call committee. The lack of candor led to a short and in some ways disastrous pastorate that continues to haunt congregational ministry. Now you can see, I think, a fairly steady progression in the nature of the stories I related. Where once there was an axiomatic expectation that no divorced pastor could remain on the clergy roster, or even be on the clergy roster if married to a previously divorced woman, we now have many divorced pastors serving on the clergy roster. We don't know how many because the ELCA does not keep that statistic. We have some serving among the Conference of Bishops, and we have some pastors now marking the third anniversaries in their third marriages. Now, if I were to ask for a show of hands from divorced pastors here, my hand would rise first. I do not enjoy for one instant the fact of being divorced. It is a biographical notation that glares at me off the page. And there's not a day when I am not consciously aware of being divorced. It is a condition of being that I carry with me everywhere. And in a word, and with frank candor, I find it shameful. I have remarried. I have 2 children from this marriage, to go along with the 5 children from my previous marriage. Folks ask my parents, who are still living and very active, how many grandchildren do you have? And they say 7. Oh, how many children did you have? 1. It is difficult, painful, explaining to my youngest daughter why my youngest son must leave our house every other weekend to go visit his mother, my previous spouse. She's very young yet. I use simple language, so she is not sensitive yet to my embarrassment. Now, all that said, and my 9th wedding anniversary having passed just last Wednesday, I must also say that being remarried, I never knew marriage could be so much downright fun. And with my wife on the back wall, I must say that. Are you skipping class to be here? I wrote it in ink. I don't know. We look around at our lives as pastors, experiencing the things we have experienced in divorce, hearing the things we hear of colleagues, and one may rightly wonder what is happening to the Lutheran pastorate. And the short answer is, what is happening to us is the same that is happening to all marriage in Western culture. It is under tremendous pressure. There is no reason to believe that clergy marriages are immune from the same influences, the same stresses, fractures, desires, and lusts that swirl in our culture, swirl also among us. And when I turn to the biblical text, most particularly to Matthew 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, and St. Mark 10, the encounter with the Pharisees, I find no comfort for my condition. I find only searing accusation. It's been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. That's Moses' law from Deuteronomy. But I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress. And anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery.